suddenly, whenever you said all that, Davros makes complete sense, and it's got nothing to do with being lazy. It's you are actually radio playing because you're so restricted in your movement, restricted in your facial expression. You're hiding behind that mask, and you're doing a radio drama on screen. Brilliant.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, that's what attracted me to it. I don't, because I get very. I'm not good on screen. I have to say, I'm not. I don't. I get very self-conscious about me, and and am I getting the right angle? And, I've got my right side. But there I can just be me. I can just be the character inside that mask. And it's great. Yeah. We were saying about the physicality of it. That because people say, "Oh, that's been great sitting in that thing and wheeling around and zipping around," and everything. I said, no, it wasn't an electric wheelchair or anything. It was based on a supermarket trolley base. Okay, onto which was massive chunks of 4x2 timber with two lead 12-volt car batteries in the back to run the electrics, into which you were bolted, and a hole in the floor in which you had to drag this thing along with your toes and not make it look as though it's wobbly. So I could, if there was an Olympic event of toe wrestling, I'd be in it. I'd be there. Trust me, I've got strongest toes in Europe. To this day, I have the strongest toes in Europe. Yeah.
Have you ever had a go at, as any of the fans, if they're starting to construct, you can see that they're starting to construct electric Daleks for people to sit in and scoot backwards.
Oh,
have you ever had a go?
Yeah, my God, the fans, Daleks are brilliant. The BBC is just knocking out stuff that they can light so it looks as though it's impressive. They're making it for real. You can see it right up front. There was a Canadian automotive and aviation electrical engineer that I met at Chicago, and he had built this black Dalek, and it was beautiful. I mean, I don't know what the compound was he was using, but it was just like a Lamborghini in a showroom, and it had shimmer under all of this thing, and you press a button on the outside, and the front would just open up like this, and the head would go up. And you could get in, and it was a wheelchair. It was an electric wheelchair, really good one. And you sat in, and then you pressed that, the whole thing closed around you. The head came down, bonk, and there was a little video screen right in your eye level, which was going straight down the eye stalk. So everything you saw on the eye stalk was what you were seeing, and the voice changer was in there. And I just thought, wow, no, I could spend all day in that. That was just class, absolute class. Now the people who do stuff, they're obsessive isn't the word. They're so concerned with the reality and the technical getting it right that they produce much better product than the BBC ever do. I mean, we talked earlier about me having been on stage, and I did a production back in 2005, was it? I think might have been called The Trial of Davros, which was a one-night only theatre event for children in need at the Thameside Theatre in Hyde in Manchester. And this had originally been written by Michael Wisher and Kevin, who ran Hyde fundraisers. But obviously Michael wasn't around, and so they asked me if I would do it, if I would play Davros, and so I reluctantly agreed to do it because, my physical memories of it were not good. But anyway, we did this, and I had an amazing team around us. There was a guy called David Price and Tony Myers, and Payne. Oh, come on, I'm one of my best friends. Why do you lose people's names suddenly? But they did all the technical stuff related to me. So they built me a new chair, which was identical to what we'd had in the studio, because I was there telling them, well, this should have been there, that should be there, and they'd got pictures and stuff that they were working from as well. And also when we were putting it on, it was just when the new series was starting. And I wanted to change the end of it because the ending was where all the audience voted, whether Davros was nasty or whether he should go to jail or whatever, but it was written for a convention, with about a couple hundred people in. We were in a 1,000, 1,500 seater theatre. I said, this isn't going to work. I think it'll last 7 hours. People will get all these voting slips and people, and then decide what we're going to then count them. No. So I changed the whole ending so that, in fact, Davros is being taken off to Gallifrey to stand trial. He allowed in order to open up a time corridor for his Daleks to follow and wipe out Gallifrey. So the ending of it resulted in the doors blowing open, and the first Dalek through was the new generation of Gold Dalek from the new series, which people had only just seen on screen. But I knew Mike Tucker, who was the visual effects guy, and we were conversing, and Dave Price was talking to him because he and Tony were absolutely fanatical about getting the detail right. So they said, "Okay, which shade of copper chrome from Halfers is it that you use to undercoat it in order to get that? And which exact Ford Cortina light bulb have you got on the head and the dimensions and everything? It all came to us, and so we had this phenomenal. And plus, we did the one thing that the BBC never had been able to do. We had an operator inside the Gold Dalek who came on. The head was manoeuvred from off stage, but inside there was a guy there, and the centre could revolve and fire a CO2 canister at the same time while moving. That was all done by CGI when the BBC did it. We did it for real on stage, which blessed them. They were just technically such superb. So, I mean, the fans are brilliant at devising and putting together things that really, really work and could actually be out there if the Daleks existed. Or do they?
Let's hope not. Terry, let's hope not. Speaking of things which may or may not have existed then, how on earth did you feel whenever Chris then comes along out of the blue and presents you with the character of Renfield? Because, I mean, to my mind, the guy who plays Davros, Renfield, where's the emotional connection there?
The emotional connection. Well, I mean, put it this way: I was approached initially by Barnaby Jones, who's a good friend of mine. He does a lot of audio stuff, and since he owns very many compromising photographs of myself, I just tend to say yes to whatever he says, No, what is the connection? I mean, I read them because I didn't even think about Davros, because I do lots of stuff, and I read them, and I was fascinated. I thought they were really good because there was a lateral look at a character from within the story. It's to do with Dracula, but it's one of these side characters, and I've always been fascinated by Renfield because I think there's this Renfield Harker switchover which I find odd, because people say Harker went over to do this thing when in fact it was probably Renfield who went over to do the deal with and got sucked in by, not sucked in, that's long term really, by Dracula. But you know what I mean? But I thought, well, here's somebody who's living in a reality and that is not his own. It is being manipulated by somebody outside. Now, I played a character where he manipulates the reality he's in order to get things done that he wants to do. So in a sense, it's the master and the servant, and the desire for things that people have in them to achieve things. I think Renfield had desires which were put in there after his meeting with Dracula, which he was fighting against, his humanity was fighting against. And I mean, it's interesting having done Davros with Big Finish so many times now, and the recent ones that I did with Paul McGann, the palindrome. We see Davros in a totally different universe, and he's married to a Thal, and he's a terribly nice guy, and he's normal, and and he's creating this thing that will be able to move things from one dimension to another. A brilliant scientist, but a really nice guy. and there's the humanity within people, like I say, within evil people. You know, babies aren't born evil; they're born as a blank sheet of paper, and there's all sorts of things can happen along the way at the place where they are, the family they're with, the nurture, the nature. And it was interesting again. I mean, what we were able to do with the big finishes was look at aspects of Davros's character. Say in I, Davros, the 4-part series, which basically starts with Davros as a 16-year-old boy and ends up literally at the moment of creation of the first Dalek. So you see that journey from boy, man, monster. How did that occur? What happened? And interestingly, when I was doing Davros, I was talking with people about it, and they're saying what you're explaining here is somebody who could well be on the spectrum, on the autism spectrum. And please, I'm not suggesting people on the autism spectrum are all Daleks or Davros loonies, but Davros as a character has a precise single desire to do things. He sees a problem, he sees the answer to it, and he goes for it. Something in the way, don't care. He's got that absolute brilliance of mind, and that single-minded, very socially unable to communicate with people socially. He's into his work, and his work is more important than anything else or anybody else. And that's where he goes for. So if that's evil, that's evil. I mean, I don't know. But, so it's an area of what you know. If you were being a psychiatrist or something, you look at it and you say, well, okay, people on the autism spectrum or people who are experiencing paranoia can have similar feelings, similar long-term goals of going. So in Renfield, you've got somebody his focus is on the master, because he's been turned by the master to focus on the master, but his own self, as in one of Chris's stories, where he's at Hyde Park, he's trying to warn people that what's coming is coming, and he knows what is likely to happen. So there's that side of him that's still humanity is saying, it's got to stop. You've got to do it now because you don't know what's coming. And they're all, oh, he's a nutter, you know, he's a nutter. Okay. He's not an evil man, but he's a screwball, you know. And people could say the same of Davros. But except that in I, Davros, he comes from a patrician family, and he has the links and the ability to have other people done away with, should he wish. So if you like, there's a link there. I mean, for me, perhaps I just like playing people who are really weird. Perhaps I am weird. Huh?
I thought
yum yum. Sorry.
Perfect.
Oh, we've got hang on. Got a woodlouse. Yeah. Terrific. Wonderful.
Method acting there. But what I love about, you know, the performance that you bring, Terry, is the fact that when I write Renfield, there's a form of sanity still there with Renfield. Renfield was an incredibly intelligent person. He was indeed the person that went out before Jonathan Harker. He saw things in that castle. I've written him. We've got a novel out called Dracula's Bedroom, where I concentrate a little bit more on the character. And I've written him as somebody who was brought up in an intensely religious family. That he was constantly disappointing his father. He liked women, he liked drink. And his career, he was a partner in Hawkins' sister firm, and he was disappointing his boss. So there was this constant disappointment. When he meets Dracula becomes this religious icon and this father figure that starts to bleed into his life and give him something that he's been craving. And I think that's the insidious nature of Dracula. I think that's his insidious design. I think that's how he seduces people. It's not through Hollywood does it through looks. The classic Bram Stoker Dracula, he had hairy hands. You know, he didn't look very attractive.
Very nice, no.
But he would.
No, it's interesting what you say there about Renfield. That in fact, Dracula is he's bleeding his mental faculties rather than his blood. But his mental faculties are part of his blood and part of his life force, you know. I don't know. Have you seen We Live in the Shadows? You must have done.
Yes.
The Australian. Yeah, I mean, and the fact that they've got an emotional vampire, you know, or the guy who goes around talking to people all the time, and they all go, you know, and then he meets this girl who's an emotional vampire who's going, oh my God, couldn't possibly do that, and sucking all the. And he suddenly realised she's a vampire as well. But there's vampiric ways, not just pure physical blood, but emotional blood, psychological blood, which is lovely because, as I say, you get that the side issue. You know, the fact that in the second one where he's drawn in his dream state to the abbey and sees Dracula at work, and him telling him, you're going to go back and you're going to let people in, let me in the way you are because I need you. And he's almost his fight against that. I mean, I don't know whether he's eating all those things in order to give him strength to try and maintain his sanity against Dracula or not. But anyway, I've just found it fascinating. Yeah, good.
On a more, I suppose, light-hearted note, then, as we draw to a close, within the realms of Dracula, all Dracula, do you, Terry, have a favoured presentation of Dracula that you enjoy watching or listening to?
Yeah. Gary Oldman in Bram Stoker's Dracula. To me, that's the most faithful of, that is a damaged man who's trying to find love, and the whole Dracula legend of spiking people and being Dracula, and then his through. I mean, yeah, I like the Tom Cruise one, Interview with a Vampire.
Yeah.
But it was it was a side off to the Dracula. I mean, I never really got into the Christopher Lees and Peter Cushings of this world. To me, it was not even schlock horror. It was just sort of joke horror, which Hammer was very good at. Let's be face it, it was a genre they did very, very well, and it certainly made. But Oldman just had so much to it, so much of the underneathness of this person that this fabled warrior who was just trying to find his wife again who was killed, and that whole eons long search for her and finding her in Nina. And I feel as sad for him dying as I do for any of the others. Yeah, and well, I just like Gary Oldman anyway.
Who doesn't?
Well, he doesn't like me.
He just hasn't got to know you as well as we do.
No, he doesn't like me. He said, "You bastard, you've got to do Davros and not me." I said, "Okay, fine. Well, that's the way it goes. That's the way the cookie crumbles, Gary. Mate, just live with it. Come on."
Cope with that. Well, his problem is he's so energetic. He throws himself into characters, and if he was a bit lazier, he maybe would have got Davros.
Exactly. I say, look, do Lazy Bastard. It's great, Oh, yeah. Just the one arm, thank you. I don't want to do that.
Terry, I'm going to be really, I'm going to be really cheeky and ask you to do something because Chris can shout at me after the fact. Even though I'm in the Stokerverse, I haven't got to hear anything of Renfield. So I can't directly ask you to do a line in Renfield or anything like that there. But I mean, you as a consummate voice actor, if Renfield would meet Davros just for a brief hello in the street, what might that sound like, do you think?
Hang on, I'm going to find it. If I can find this. Let's get rid of that one. There we go. Oh, I say, these are not the parts and poems of the body only, but of the soul. Oh, I say that these are the soul. The soul! He has my soul. He has all of me. He has stolen my life and my very dreams and almost my thoughts. Don't you see?
Brilliant. Brilliant. I think Chris is a wee bit emotional because I think that's the first time he's got to hear that too.
Yeah, it is actually. Yeah, yeah. It's just it always. I'm always very grateful for talent to want to do anything I've written.
I just found that whole thing really good that he was quoting, the body electric, from the poem, from the poem, and yeah, the Walt Whitman thing, and
yeah,
his own session with soul, and what was going, what he was writing about it, the body electric.
yeah.
That was my key into Renfield, I have to say.
Okay.
That when I read them through, because I always, something comes off a page and you think, gotcha, and I go with that. And if it's wrong, I expect a director to correct me and tell me to go a different direction. So often they don't. I like being directed. I like being told that's rubbish. I had a really good director, Philip Martin, who sadly just died. He's a radio drama director, although having done Gangsters and written for Doctor Who and everything. And he took no shit at all. You do a scene and he'd come in and say, yeah, okay, Terry, right, okay. Can you just concentrate and just do it properly? Don't play about, don't muck me about. Just, you can do it. You're being lazy. I say, well, lazy's my forte. Is it time for tea? Yeah.
Brilliant. there's literally I would hate to see on live television somebody having to interview you because there's times where you just there's no follow up to that. Now to the weather.
So in downtown Los Angeles today, we're looking at smog, and more smog.
And just for good measure, a little bit of smog as well.
Some smog. Pictures at 11.
Terry, what's next on the horizon for yourself as well? What else are you working on aside from this? Well, this is done now. This is in the can. So what's the next big challenge for you?
Use that odd word I don't like. Working. I don't know that one.
Okay, gainful employment, paying the rent.
Gainful, unemployment or employment. Well, I mean, actually, since when the pandemic hit or the COVID thing came into being last March, I basically, invested in all this, which is actually in a corner of my study, because suddenly all the studios were closing down. I used to do a lot of going down to London just with Big Finish and what have you, and with Barnaby and Spiteful Puppet and what have you, and other people. And suddenly that went. So I thought, well, I'll get it here, so I'll do it here, and it's been brilliant. I mean, last year has been great in terms of work. It keeps coming in because people have got to get some things done, and for me, it's wonderful. I mean, I don't have to even doing online conventions in the States. I don't have to get on a bloody plane and fly to Los Angeles. Fabulous, great. I can be here and say, oh, hang on, and then go and get myself another cup of tea and carry on. I'm 75, for God's sakes. I'm drifting along. I'm enjoying playing with the dogs, going out on the beach when I can, having time with my wife, and it's the old Jenny Joseph poem, when I'm an old man, I will wear purple, and I can eat a pound of sausage as I go, and pick up things and press buttons in shops and sit on the floor in the street and spit, and it's all this sort of what you can do, because I don't. There's lots of stuff I would love to do. I mean, there's so many things I wish I'd done in my life, but there's no point living a what if life. It's a case of I am very much a carpe diem, and what went, and the Archers, I was in that for 45 years. It went, due to the bizarre decisions of the editor Sean O'Connor regarding my character and the character of my family in the thing. But you just say, well, that's it, that's gone. It's you move on to something else. I have to tell you, there's really good life after Ambridge. Is really quite good. I enjoy the day to day, and I'm enjoying catching up on reading. I'm enjoying catching up on. I've never been a driven or a pushy person. If I go into a room and there are people who could offer me work, I tend to go to the opposite end of the place. I just want to be seen to be. It's not my. I'm really shy, actually. It's probably difficult for you to believe that, but and a lot of actors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I totally get the shy thing. Yeah. I mean, secretly, I was asking you that just so that Chris would know that you're actually available for more work because, it seems.
I'm very shy.
Oh, you've been very shy.
Especially on very shy at the moment. Yeah.
You can't see me. You can't see me.
Can't see me. Can't see me. Woo, woo, woo.
I'm playing peekaboo with Terry Malloy. This has to be the weirdest day of my life. What did you do last night?
Get weird.
I played peekaboo with Terry Malloy.
Hey, look at my lockdown hair. Look at me. Look at me. I haven't had my hair this long since the 60s. I mean, it really now, it's, I'm playing Cousin It.
Well, I was going to say, you could do a damn good job of the first Doctor at the minute.
Yes, I could. Yes.
Yeah. You should do that. There's an idea. Yeah. Do you know, I've got a horrible feeling that Chris is going to tell me off, and we really should go for it. So, Chris, how have you enjoyed tonight's interview?
It's been great.
Be very careful what you say.
I don't.
I have your.
I don't tell people off. No, it's been great. Thank you very much, Terry. It's been fantastic. A little insight into one of the characters that I've loved as a kid. And I've enjoyed following what you've been doing with Big Finish, and it's just getting that little snippet. That honestly, I haven't heard anything yet. So that was.
You not heard it? Oh, right.
No, I haven't heard it yet.
No. I don't know if it's like that. I can't remember.
No, but
I do a lot more voiceovers. No, I think it was very much like that. But I used to do loads of voiceovers, and you go to a studio and do something. The next day they call you back in and say, "Oh, we just want to redo that thing because they weren't quite happy about that." So, you remember what you were doing? I said, "I don't know." Like a computer, I walk out of this building, clink,
goes off.
Memory's gone. Right, what are we doing now? No, play it to me, and then I'll probably pick up on it. Now, I think that was very much in. It may not be exactly. I may have just been a slightly bit over the top today, but it was certainly in the ballpark of where I felt Renfield should be. Yeah. Not. It's the whole thing about people. I remember Michael Caine saying, people say, "How do you play such a good drunk?" He said, "Well, you basically play not being drunk. Drunks are people who are trying to show you they're not drunk. So if you're going, that's acting drunk. That's play acting drunk, But if you're spending time talking to people and explaining things very carefully about what's happening, so people have no idea that you're actually quite drunk, then it's a different ballgame. And it's the same with madness. If you start playing mad, it doesn't have the power of madness that is actually in there, and it just bubbles. But the person is there. I mean, Hopkins in Silence of the Lambs, and they talk to him about it. They say, "How did you get that? How are you so evil?" Because I mean, Hopkins, he's a bit like me. He's a lazy actor. He said, "You basically don't blink and whisper. Everyone else fills in everything else. You don't need to do anything else." And you create it. You're creating that within yourself, and it's like what I do with radio, with going back to voices and down the thing. I try to create a moment where I'm having a relationship, and there are lots of actors who can't pull that off the page and translate it down there. It sounds read. I've always had a facility to be able to read. I don't read fast. I read very slowly when I'm reading a book. But when I'm reading a script, I'm usually 4 lines ahead of what my mouth is saying. So I'm preparing what's coming up. and although I prepared it anyway, but I'm just building up the tensions and whether I want to, push that forward technically. This is all technical things, which is rubbish because it's in me and it's the way I do it. Other people do it differently and create very much the same effect or different effects, which I sit back and go, "Wow, that was good." You know,
Well,
I didn't see.
your effect is good, and you do it well, sir. And I have had the fortune to interview some very nice people, but there's very few of them that I can honestly say that I could just sit back and listen to all night. And at some stage when all this ends, hopefully, Chris myself can track you down, and we'll either take you for a walk along that beach with the dogs, or we'll buy you a pint of Guinness.
Lovely.
I am a couple.
Lovely. We'll go for that. Definitely.
Chris, we can't buy him a couple of pints. Look what he's like with none.
Exactly. I want to see what he's like with a couple of pints.
You don't know what I'm here, do you?
Before you disappear, we have to do the traditional. Folks, it has been an absolute pleasure just enjoying the company of Terry Malloy and hearing these stories. Hopefully you have all enjoyed it as well. If I possibly can, I will try and coerce Chris to bring him back for another episode, because I have a feeling that Terry has more stories to tell us and a hell of a lot more characters to give us an insight to as well. In the meantime, Chris, thank you very much for turning up. You got to do the lazy thing, and
I was the lazy bastard.
this thing. And Terry, I salute you, sir, and thank you very much for the honour of getting to chat to you this evening. It has been an absolute pleasure. And with that,
Indeed,
say,
it really has. Thank you.
I know it's always a pleasure talking to me, but trust me, I think I'm feeling it more than you tonight.
Hang on, can I just check? See if that fibre is. Yeah, it's been a pleasure talking to you. It really has.
Yeah. When I leave here, I'm going to remember you as people that I once met. Good night, everyone.
Bye, folks.
And I have the absolute pleasure of being joined by Mr. John Peel. Good evening, sir.
Evening.
Thank you for taking your time out to join us. We know you've got a lot on your plate, so we will hit the ground running. I'm unreliably informed that you are the author of in excess of 100 novels now.
Yeah, one of these days I really have to sit down and count them, I suppose. I think it's about up to 120 now, but I'm not entirely certain.
It's a fairly respectable number now. Some people say that I'm a little bit of a Doctor Who fan. I don't quite understand where they get it from myself, but you have written quite a few Doctor Who novels. It's true to say. As an author, though, I mean, it's a different matter, a job of writing a book, but as a fan, do you have a particular era that stands out for you as one that you enjoy more?
Well, I came in almost at the very beginning, so I suppose the Hartnell era is my kind of touch point. But the Pertwee era and the early Tom Baker, the late, the early to mid, perhaps even late 70s, was a superb period also. So it's hard to pick exactly which I prefer.
Oh, I can relate to that. I mean, personally, I can quite happily sit down and watch Hartnell just as easily as I can watch Tennant now. Mm-hmm. From an author's point of view, and I know this is a slight detour, but how do you find the writing of the stories? Because the flavour of Doctor Who has changed. You know, if you go look at the type of stories that were delivered in the Hartnell area, even then to the type of stories that were delivered in the Tom Baker. For you as an author, does that cause much of a change in how you approach writing a story for them?
Well, we're still talking basically the same show. It's just a slightly different emphasis as far as I look at it. It's using a slightly different writing palette. Other than that, the show is the show.
Yeah.
Even to this day, the series is it's evolving in a way. Obviously, you can't stay with the same style of telling the story, but you can stay with the same import. The way that you put a stress on things, the way that the Doctor is shown as a caring and concerned character, that kind of thing doesn't change, and it shouldn't.
Yeah.
Whereas the trappings, of course, yeah, you can do anything you like with those. They're great fun.
Moving on to where we are now, how have you had the misfortune, I mean the blessing of getting to know Chris then?
Well, Chris contacted me in the first place, as I recall, and we had a nice chat. And he has this tremendous energy, which kind of drags you along with him once he starts talking. I mean, I'm sure you noticed this, right?
Yes.
So he's very good at convincing you that this is going to be fun. And really, as a writer, that's what I want out of my work. It has to be fun for me. I mean, it's not a job. Oh, well, it is a job. I mean, obviously, you work. But it's not one where you have to go in and clock in and work like that. It's a job where you have to put your enthusiasm, your imagination, and everything into the line and follow it to see where it will go. So obviously, if the job, having said that, if it looks like it's going to be impressive and fun, that kind of charges your batteries for you, and it makes it so much more entertaining, so much easier to come up with ideas. And Chris manages to do that pretty well when he pitched the ideas to me. And I could almost immediately he would say something. I could feel the wheels grinding in the back of the brain, going, "Oh, I can do something with that." And that's what I enjoy most, really, is this ability to come in and then just take it in weird directions and just have fun.
And then you two are working together now on the Dracula's Bedlam project. Now, I'm not one of these people who's going to stand here and pretend that I have read every single one of your 100 novels. I'm a fanboy. I've lifted the Doctor Who ones. I've lifted the Star Trek ones. I'm aware that other books exist. Someone even mentioned James Bond Jr., but we'll come to that later. But with Bedlam, I mean, it feels, from my sort of layman's perspective, that this is quite a shift in direction and sort of genre for yourself. I mean, is Bedlam something you've really, and I hate to use it, something you've been able to really get your teeth into?
Oh, very much so. In fact, I started off my writing career fairly early on doing young adult horror novels. So it's an extension from there, really. I mean, it goes back to the beginning of my writing. It was one of those things where I went into an editorial meeting and I pitched all my ideas, and the editor was like, and then finally she said, "Well, what have you just finished? What have you just done?" And I said, "Well, I've written this horror novel." And then she says, and then all of a sudden we started talking, and I ended up selling her a bunch of novels, horror, of course. Yeah. So it goes back, but I always try and do something interesting. When I delivered my first horror novel under a pseudonym, pen name Nicholas Adams, I delivered the finished story, and my editor called me up, because they always do this, they come in and they tell you, but, or whatever. And she called me up and she said, "You know something? I just finished reading your manuscript, and it really shocked me." And I said, "Oh, why was that?" And she said, "Well, it made sense." She says, "You've no idea how many horror novels we get in that don't make any sense whatsoever." She said, "But yours I saw where the plot was going and I could follow it along. And you didn't. She said I had one book in last week where the person who is the monster is revealed at the end, and in chapter two, it, this person appears with the monster. So it's like, how can that be? But she liked the way that my plot actually held together. And I said, well, of course it should. And that's really how I got into writing those things back way back in my career. And I haven't done any for a while, but every now and again I've written a short story usually, and had fun with those. But this Dracula's Bedlam is basically a collection of short stories making it up an entire novel, which is very interesting because you can do a little bit in one direction, and then you go shooting off in another direction, and then it all comes together in the end, which is hopeful, and well, that's what we're aiming at anyway. Let's put it that way.
I'll sort of ask you both this, but we'll start with yourself, John. I mean, writing with someone else in general must be a challenge. I'm not suggesting that writing with Chris is a particularly special challenge, but I mean, how does that work? Because I mean, you are both very creative people, and I know a lot of creative people, and the ideas don't always marry. So how does this marriage work?
Basically, because we're in completely different countries and writing on our own at the same time. But we consult each other over the plot details to make sure that they will actually fit. But other than that, he's doing his part, I'm doing my part, and we're bringing them together, hopefully, to mesh nicely in the end.
Yeah, I find it really easy to work with John. John's the brilliant creativity that anybody who's looked at any of his novels. He brings a short story, we look at it. It's like, whoa, okay, great. Recently you passed me a short story, John. You were like, can you use this? And I looked at it. Of course I can use it. So my job is then to get that to fit into the synopsis or the main sort of plot of the novel. And we've both created, I think, some memorable stories together. And John crafted a really interesting character called Mary, who interweaves throughout the book. So yeah, it's been fun, and I think it's the emphasis is it's fun. We are authentic to the Dracula feel, but we don't confine ourselves. We don't see Dracula as this thing or that thing. What we're doing is we've got the overall premise that everything is taking place in the asylum or the area around it. We link to the original novel, and we explore different themes from the novel, but we also bring it together. So Dracula's present. We pay specific emphasis on Renfield, obviously, it's in the asylum, but we round the character out a little bit more, and we introduce new characters, which I think is very important to the Dracula mythos. Nobody wants to just have another retelling of a book that's 124 years old. There has to be something new brought to it. I'm working with John. I think we've crafted something particularly special.
Very good. John, funny that is quite well. Chris has kind of have answered it. I mean, whenever Chris first approached you with this, and I know we've sort of dealt with the working relationship, but in terms of your working relationship with the Dracula universe, then, I mean, did you initially sort of feel that, oh, this was going to be a very narrow corridor, and then suddenly through Chris's talking and convincing and slight arm twisting, you sort of start to see the doors open up? Or from the off for you, was this like, oh, we can do new stuff, great, let's go crazy?
I think it's been a bit of both. Wouldn't you say, Chris, that you would say, well, for example, I'm just writing a section of the story which is about Van Helsing on his own. And Chris put down a couple of suggestions about what he would like to see in that portion. And as he did so, I immediately thought, oh, I can do this with it and run here and make a little commentary here. And that's how it's really worked. You know, part of the great fun of doing stories is seeing where the ideas, the inspirations take you. And that's one of the fun things with this book. Chris would say something, and then I would say, "Oh well, what if we?" And then I'd say something, and then he'd say, "Ah, but then we can do." And that was really, it was a very creative process, and it's worked very well on that. We've been in almost complete agreement from the beginning, which was amazing because I don't play well with others. I usually do not write with other people. Uh, in fact, out of my 120 books, give or take, I've only co-written one, which shows you I don't usually play with other people. I like to take my own stories, my own ideas, and do this, but Chris has managed to persuade me this is going to be fun.
Brilliant.
I came in.
Well, I think part of the secret of successful collaboration is respect, and remember why you want to work with that person. I was lucky because I've always wanted to work with John. Ever since I was a wee lad and I was going to the library and going around the little carousel and picking out John's books all the time and going home with them and reading them and rereading them and rereading them. There's something that I call it the John Peel magic. And, Stokerverse is very lucky to be able to harness that John Peel magic. And that's part of it. It's that respect. It's listening to the other person as well, and allowing yourself to be carried along with what the other writer wants to do. You know, and it is a fun process. Then it's like, okay, John's got a great story about a werewolf character, and I'm like, okay, that's really cool. Okay, that works great. And I was kind of painting at the time, and then I painted a picture on the walls and sent it to John. So, what do you think about this? And we looked at it, and I was getting inspired by what John was saying and his werewolf character. And then we've now started looking at that as maybe another main character in the Stokerverse that we can do in book two. If we ever get lucky to do book two, John and I can then start looking at that character a little more. But I think it's about that respect. It's about always remembering why you want to work with that person. I don't think collaborations work if a publisher says you must work with this person for this particular marketing reason. I think that's very unhealthy. And I think it's better that collaborators find each other. It's a bit like a romance story, but not really. But they find each other, and then they're able to craft this fantastic product. Because ultimately, the product's the thing that matters. The audience aren't going to say, "Oh, there's Chris and John's book." The audience are going to say, "There's Dracula's Bedlam." They're going to look at it as a whole, and they're either going to like it or they're not. So we have to make sure that we try and hit all the notes together and encourage each other. Writing can be a very lonely process. I don't know if you agree, John. It can be a wee bit lonely, and it's nice at times just to be able to send an email and say, "Can you have a look at this? What do you think?" And one of John's great skills is that he's a fantastic editor. So John's editing my stuff as he's getting chunks of it. I can reveal that Andy's actually read 75 pages of it. So and Andy's enjoyed it apparently.
Yeah.
I haven't paid him any money to say that,
Nope.
but but John has literally taken that, edited it, and made it look good. So I'm very appreciative of working with John.
I can honestly say, John, he has paid me no money. But don't take that as a story that needs to apply to yourself. I'm sure in the end it'll all work out well for you. But it's nice to hear that already you are contemplating a book two. That must bode well. Now, John, I have a few pointed questions that Chris kind of supplied. He says, make sure when we're chatting with John Knight, there's a couple of things that need to come out. One of the things that needs to come out, apparently, which apparently is totally relevant to Dracula's Bedlam and everything else, is James Bond Jr. Ask him about James Bond Jr. and his pen name. I loved those books. They were my favouriteest books when I was a wee lad.
Very true, actually, yeah. Very, very true.
Oh, that was the source of many stories. They came to me originally and asked me, "Would you like to do these James Bond Junior books?" And I had no clue what it was. Beyond the fact that the title, and I said, "Well, okay, yeah, James Bond. I've done Doctor Who. I've done Star Trek. Yeah, James Bond will be a great one to do next." The problem was they really didn't know what they were doing, and they were making this animated show off in California and Thailand or wherever it was, and they wanted me to do a series of 6 novels based on this, and hopefully it would keep going forever. That was the idea. And it was one of these package deals, which meant that I was writing for a company that was selling a finished product. So we were putting the books together ourselves, and then they were being published by Penguin Books over here in America. And when I was doing this whole project, it ended up with me having 3 editors at the same time, which is, as you can imagine, is not a very good system for making things work smoothly, because they couldn't agree with one another. And one would tell me one thing, and one would tell me another thing, and the third one wouldn't say anything till you were completely finished, and then they'd say, "Oh, I don't like the way you did this bit right at the beginning," instead of saying at the time. And then we, along with the 3 different sets of editors, we had to negotiate with Eon Productions, who of course own all of the copyrights for James Bond. And they had a whole different realm of stipulations. For example, I couldn't use anything from the novels. I could only use things from the movies. So if I wanted to do something which was from, in one story, I wanted to mention Universal Exports, for example. And Universal Exports, they said, yeah, that's from the books, you can't use this. So I said, no, if you go and watch On Her Majesty's Secret Service, immediately after the opening credits, you will see there is a big plaque saying Universal Exports. It's in the movies. So they said, oh, all right, then you can use it. And that was the kind of dealing I had to put up with. I had to constantly argue my points. And I started out taking the job very seriously, but by the end of book 6, I was just so slap happy. The villain in the book 6 was this wonderfully named Ms. Fortune, and she had a butler. So I thought, right, that's it. And I turned them into Lady Penelope and Parker from Thunderbirds, down to the pink Rolls Royce and everything. And nobody noticed, not one person in all of that thing noticed I was sending Thunderbirds up. And I wrote my wife's maiden aunts into it. I wrote her father into it. I wrote so many idiotic comments and stuff into it to make it more palatable to myself, to make it more fun to write. And I put more jokes in that, I think, almost any of my other books. It was just, it got to be so difficult. I was so glad when they didn't actually expand anymore, and 6 books was it. But
006 was the magic number.
yeah. They like 6 in the publishing industry for some reason. I don't know why. I've had several 6-book contracts.
Probably box sets sell well.
I guess so, yeah. Yeah,
one thing though on the use of pen names, I kind of get why a lot of authors use pseudonyms or write under pen name. But one of the things I've always wondered is it just a simple fact of, oh, I'm going to make up a name, John Smith, because I don't really want people to know him right now? Or do you kind of create another character in your own head to write some of those stories? Is I don't know if that makes sense. Is sometimes the subject matter something you don't want to really think about the process, so you kind of invent a John Smith and let John Smith write that story?
No, I'm too much of an egotist for that. It's always as much as me as there can be in it. But my main rule is don't take any jobs unless unless I'm sure I can give it 100%. Which almost always I can. There have only been two exceptions in my entire writing career, as it is. And the James Bond Jr. was one of them, simply because it wasn't what I thought I was going to be doing, which kind of made it very difficult. And then all the interference. What most of my work has just been a tremendous joy. So I don't have to worry about it. I've only ever had one bad editor. And I've had a couple of dozen different ones, and I've had some superb editors where it's just an absolute pleasure to sit down and discuss projects with them and working with them. And I've been very fortunate in that, I suppose. So,
just on to lastly go back to the world of Dracula, then, I mean, again, from the point of view as a writer and just as an everyday fan, there's a whole world of Draculas out there. Do you have a particular favorite representation that works for you?
Are we talking screen or novel?
Screen or book or whatever ticks your fancy.
Well, I'm always ambiguous about a lot of the Dracula representations because they all insist on taking a divergent path from from the way Stoker originally did it. They all go wandering off in their own directions, and they have their own views of what he should be, which often gets kind of silly. I mean, I enjoy the Hammer movies, for example, but that's not really Dracula because all he does. I mean, I think Christopher Lee once complained that he only had 7 words in one movie, and that's not Dracula. It's a monster they've created in the image of Dracula rather than Dracula himself. What I always prefer is when they get back into the character and understand the concepts that were behind it. I suppose I'm one of the few people who actually quite enjoyed the TV version of Dracula that they tried to resurrect a few years ago with Jonathan Rhys-Meyers playing Dracula, because he was a very seductive character.
Yeah.
In the Myers version, you can see how people would do what he wanted. He had that charisma and also the kind of smouldering sex appeal that appeals to a lot of the young women. So I quite enjoyed that one. Others, I love the Marvel version of Tomb of Dracula. I mean, when you've got Gene Colan drawing Dracula, you can't really go wrong anywhere. It's beautiful stuff. So I've enjoyed a lot of various images of it. I only recently rewatched the Universal Draculas again.
Yeah.
Seeing the original, and I love the Spanish version of it that was filmed at the same time as the Bela Lugosi version, because they actually added a little bit extra into the script, which made it work better. The Lugosi one clearly was working with a truncated script. And little bits of it had been chopped out of the movie, but it was they were both fun, and considering they were really one that was done all that long ago, it was kind of interesting.
Yeah, very good. No, I would agree with what a lot you're saying. I know we have eaten up a lot of your time and have to let you go, but I have one last thing, just very quickly, a little fanboy indulgence. I do realise that obviously with your writing and your time, you also knew Terry Nation. And I just sort of wondered, how was he as a person? How did you find him as an individual?
Well, working with Terry was great fun because he had a great sense of humour, and he never took himself seriously. He didn't believe all of the publicity about him being savior of Doctor Who and all of this stuff. He would just make jokes out of it and everything. He was one of the kindest, most generous people I can imagine. He was very, very um, for, for example, whatever I was writing based on his work, he would always say, I've had my shot at it, John, it's your turn now. And he would never argue with me if I wanted to do something interesting with the bits and pieces. And that was very generous because most writers are more inclined to say, no, stick to my outline, stick to my way of doing it. But Terry was never like that. He was always very, very kind and very generous. And we would have a phone call and we would be laughing like crazy all the time. I mean, he was just such a very, very pleasant person, nice gentleman. And I had a tremendous time with him.
Well, there you go, folks. You've heard it here, and be sure to check out more updates online as this develops. And happy Dracula Day to you all as well. Thanks once again to our two guests. Thanks for watching the Stokerverse and Stoker Macaulay. And tune in next time for more dark tales, and we'll maybe even let Chris get more than a sentence in as well. Until then, I bid you adieu.
Bye, folks.